So Dianne Post is an international human rights lawyer. She's been working for women's rights literally since elementary school. She's going to talk about the proposed new draft articles on prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity, what the proposed treaty says, does, and the problem of using only gender in the treaty. So thank you so much, Dianne, for telling us about this, and over to you.
To start with, these draft articles are aiming toward a treaty, an international treaty on the prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity. So first is the definition of what is a crime against humanity, which pretty much tracks what we already know from the International Court and other treaties, which is any act that's part of a widespread or systematic attack directed against a civilian population with knowledge that this attack is happening. And the specific acts are murder, extermination, enslavement, mass deportation, torture, and the sexual crimes, rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, forced sterilization, or any other form of sexual violence of comparable gravity. I have to fight about what that might mean. And also prosecution or persecution based on political, racial, national, ethnic, cultural, religious, gender, or other groups. Now, this is where the gender is never defined, and it does not say sex or women at all, just gender. Enforced disappearance, apartheid, or other inhumane acts. It then goes to define these various terms, but it never defines gender. So what the treaty says then is that you have an obligation not to do these things and an obligation to prevent others from doing these things. If you sign this treaty, which isn't a treaty yet, but should you sign it, you have to make it a crime in your own country, establish national jurisdiction over this crime. Should it happen, you have to investigate thoroughly and impartially, take preliminary measures, such as putting the accused persons in custody and protecting the witnesses and victims, to try the person there, the accused person in your country, or if you're not going to do that, send that person to the state that is asking for the person who committed these crimes. Now, it also specifies, obviously, for the rule of law, that the alleged offender should be treated fairly, and victims and witnesses should also be treated fairly, be able to tell their story and get damages from what was done to them. Then there's a section on extradition to the state that's asking for the person, that states give each other, and states, of course, means countries, that states give each other mutual legal assistance, how they settle disputes between them, how to run the system, and sign up to the treaty. So that's what the treaty is about. Now, how did we find out about this treaty? Well, there were rumors about changing the term gender in the ICC, in the Rome Treaty at the International Criminal Court. Well, as Amparo said, you can't just change a word in a treaty that all these other countries have signed on to. So I knew there was something that was wrong about that. Now, you can change the interpretation of that word and how it's used, but you can't just change the word. So in the ICC, this is the definition of gender. For the purpose of this statute, it is understood that the term gender refers to the two sexes, male and female, within the context of society. The term gender does not indicate any meaning different from the above. It doesn't take a lawyer to understand this has some problems. It is the result of some major battles that were at the negotiation of this particular treaty between people that wanted gender and people that wanted sex. This was the resolution that they came up with. So the people who wanted sex feel like they won because it says it refers to the two sexes, male and female. But the people who wanted gender think that they won because it says within the context of society. So that's the phrase they're using, the gender group is using to try to say, well, things have changed since this was filed and the society has moved on, and now we have to use gender. So that's where they're pushing that based on the language, the actual word, the definition that's in the ICC. So this potential treaty, this draft, has already been vetted and drafted through the International Law Commission. And from there, it goes up to the sixth committee. This is the last step before it goes out to the countries for potential signing. So this sixth committee has this, and they have a meeting in November. They did not ask for submissions, but we're going to send it anyway. This treaty has actually been in the works for 13 years. We obviously did not know about it. This organization didn't even exist 13 years ago. So it wasn't possible that we could have worked on it from the beginning. But so we drafted a 17-page document responding to the issue of using only gender in the treaty, not defined at all, because they know if they try to define it, they're going to get into the same battle that they had at the ICC. So you can read this document on the website as soon as it gets up. I guess it's not up yet, but I can tell you, or because of the time, I'm going to skip over how it was actually done, which you don't really need to know that anyway, and just go to the end of it. And I start out by not just hitting him in the face with, you have to use sex, because if I do that, they're going to do exactly what they always do, just throw it away. You know, you're a transphobe. We're not going to read this. So I have to kind of ease into it before I actually get to the part where I say you have to use gender. And I also use arguments that were also made during the 13 years that this treaty has been under consideration. There were people who objected to this, but there were far more people who didn't. And the usual groups have weighed in. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, SOGI, all of these kinds of groups have weighed in. But there were some groups and there were some countries during the discussions of this that wanted gender to be defined or wanted to use sex instead of gender. So I had to read all of that and then use those arguments as well to convince them that they've missed a very big point here. So in the conclusion of the document that we're sending to them, and in this document, I also ask for us to be observers at the November session and for us to be able to speak at the November session, since we have not been able to speak yet. I don't think either one of those things will be granted, but at least we ask. So here's from the conclusion. If the goal of the treaty is to draft provisions that are effective, using gender rather than sex will not address the underlying structural basis of inequality leading to violence. Now, they do say, while they're talking about crimes against humanity, this is violence, right? They do admit that internationally, violence against women is a huge issue and getting worse. And so that was a major reason to do this and put that section in there about all these sexual crimes. So I have to focus back on that. You're not going to fix that by doing this. The treaty should focus on the victims, and legal protection should not be eviscerated for women and girls who are the focus of violence the world over. And again, during the discussions of this, they did admit that it was women and girls who are the focus of violence. They're civilians, and yet they are targeted for all of those kinds of things that we know about have happened in many of the genocides and many of the wars that were ongoing and are ongoing. The conflation of the category of sex with gender hinders the protection of women and girls from violence perpetrated against them by boys and men. And of course, I go into the issue of you can't have valid statistics, you can't have decent programs to correct the problem, because any program you make up, for example, giving free feminine hygiene products to women, will be challenged by men because they will say, well, I don't get a period, so it's not fair because you're discriminating against me and I'm a woman. So it will just eviscerate any of the issues, the problems, and ways to possibly solve them.